That's right. This is Conf T with your SC. I am your host, Brian Young, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Tom Porto. How are you, sir?
I work at Cisco, so things are great, Brian. Love it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Glad to be back.
Yeah, no, definitely. I am on PTO today. That's why I am not wearing, a professional shirt with buttons or a collar or anything like that. I'm helping my parents
taking the
move.
Super Mario shirt, though.
Hey, actually, no. Super Daddy-O.
Oh.
Yes, Super Daddy-O.
Okay. All right, that's a flex.
That, well, it was on my. I was chaperoning my daughter's field trip yesterday, and I have an awesome dad hat that I had no problem wearing because I was the only parent in the class. So I'm like, yep, I am awesome dad. Even though I threw up my back in the morning. So you know what? It never ends, Tom. Like, we're all sitting here talking about it before. Like, when it rains, it pours. Threw up my back yesterday. The SHO is back in the shop. It's probably not going to come out. I'm done dealing with that thing. I'm very sad because I
shut
love
it
that
down.
car.
Turn the recording off. We're done.
We're done. This is
back in the
our
shop.
Final. This is it. With our final episode. It's only going to be
Season
3
3
minutes
will
long.
come when the show's back out.
I mean, not for nothing. I didn't mention it in the other recordings because of the way we recorded, but I think it was like 2 days after our re-debut episode came out. My car was back in the shop. And it was like, I'm like, this is bad. This is a bad omen. So, word to the wise, don't get a green car. I think Ozzy Osbourne has a thing against green cars. I remember seeing that on his show there that he did with his son, the road trip show. He's like, he stays away from green cars. He thinks they're cursed. So
that car was green?
Yeah, dark green.
That was oh, okay. I thought it was black. It must be a really deep,
it's a very dark green. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least it wasn't gray. Well, it would have been nice if it was gray because then as it was, people always thought when I'd come up on them, they're like looking back and it's like, oh man, it's a Taurus, it's a police car. They move out of the way. But, when they saw the color, they're like, what is this, Forest Patrol? So, speaking of Forest Patrol, only you can prevent forest fires. If you were going to hear, we're going to hear a little bit of beeping, just like that one, every 30 seconds now because one of our guests, Mike Geller, he claims that he changed the smoke detector battery yesterday, but evidence seems to be saying otherwise. So,
yeah,
that's
Brian. Quite obviously, I think I'm a little better at DDoS attack detection and mitigation than I am with smoke detectors. The facts, unfortunately, prove that to be true.
The new batteries are just overperforming. That's all.
Yeah,
I don't know. Something.
That's it.
But but at least your car is the right shade of green. As a Jets fan, I'm a favor of dark green. Brian throws darts at pictures of Jets guys, but it's our year. Here we go.
Wow.
Yes, we still have a team. I heard.
The gloves are
barely
off.
hanging on. So.
Well, the gloves are off already. We're only a couple minutes in, and we've already
I'll take it when you barely win any games over enough years. You kind of have to take that and live with it. This year's going to be our year.
Wow. Okay, so we've got Mike Geller, the Jets fan, DDoS pro that sucks at changing batteries in smoke detectors, and the other Brian that spells it the right way. Thank you for that. I know, even though I know you had nothing to do with that. Brian Green, our other guest here. Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, you're not a Jets fan.
Not a Jets fan. Boston-based, so New England through and through. Going to be another tough rebuilding year for the boys in blue, but we'll see what happens. So, Brian Green, I'm the director of strategic alliances and business development here at Radware, managing the Cisco partnership. So,
awesome. And I'm sorry, Mike, throughout all that, I never even got your title other than just sucks at changing batteries and smoke detectors.
Probably the nicest thing anybody will say to me all day, but I'm on Brian and I are on the same team at Radware, and I am a distinguished architect there after 25-year career at Cisco. So I'm really happy to be here. Nice. All the joking aside, very nice to see you guys today.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, guys. I know we've been trying to get this lined up for a while. In fact, we wanted this to be the debut episode when we came back in, but schedules just didn't work out. And not for nothing, you guys have been busy. which was half the reason we wanted to do it. So as the debut episode,
Yeah.
because DDoS has been kind of a big thing lately. And I, especially in the healthcare sector, I don't know, Brian or Michael, which one of you want to take that, but I know we were running through some pretty interesting events back in, I think it was February, March timeframe.
Yeah, Brian, the net of it is the DDoS game is about availability. It's funny with all the technology, with all the complicated stuff that goes on in all these attacks. It really comes back to keeping the services and networks available and protecting your customers' data and healthcare, what they call PHI. And look, this is about being ready. It's not about a knee-jerk reaction to what you can do today. But as it turns out, some of the latest Killnet hacktivist-oriented attacks have been targeted at healthcare recipients. And I don't know, Brian Green, we've been on how many calls with different hospitals over the last 2 months that we've had to emergency onboard to get them out of trouble. So, I mean, Brian, to me, it's we have that capability as Cisco to emergency onboard a customer and kind of get them out from drowning, right? To help them and be better prepared going forward. But yeah, man, I mean, we've been Brian Young. It's been crazy. I mean, there's been there, and it. By the way, the last recent few weeks, it was started out with healthcare. But if you look at what happened in Australia and you look at what happened in Sudan and some of that, uh, it's a cross industry thing. I mean, but Brian, yeah, you've got it right. Brian Green and I have been with our team on. I mean, I don't even know how many calls, many in the last.
Dozens.
Yeah, I mean,
Dozens upon dozens. Yeah, these attack firms, they don't want to waste a good tragedy, right? Like some of the events that we've seen globally here. So, yeah, listen, it's, I grew up in the data center, right? So I equate this to, DDoS to something similar to backup, right? It's very much a very important, critical insurance policy, right? Certainly at this day and age where attackers are getting pretty creative, and cyber war is very much a real thing and a real threat to business, and they don't discriminate. It could be a K through 12 institution, or it could be your Fortune 50 type account, right? They just don't discriminate, and they cast a pretty wide net.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, you come after, you come not prepared, and you have to start to deal with the regulatory authorities on why your business is not available and your data's not safe and critical services aren't available. It gets ugly. So I know we're going to talk today in a little while about what it takes to be better prepared. But I hope when everybody listens to this today, they'll walk away with that as one of the outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. What is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of reaction, or whatever the phrase is, right? You mentioned the Australia thing. I'm not familiar with it. Can you give us a little bit more details on that?
Yeah, so this one was a little kooky. So as Brian Green was saying, we have a kind of we actually have a if you're familiar with the concept of channels that Cisco has, and selling through partners and things. What many people don't know is that there is a whole economy around denial of service. There are recruiters that go look for customers, people to attack, and there are others who actually write the malware, who write the code, who write the attacks themselves, and they kind of hide themselves from the public view in this respect to an extent. They communicate on the dark web. There's a whole thing. So what happened in Australia is really it's really kind of strange. So but I understand it. Here's what happened. There were some statements made in a fashion show around around a specific nation and religion and unintentionally kind of printed on clothes and things a phrase that was very detrimental to their set of beliefs. And listen, if whatever religion you might subscribe to or whatever you happen to believe in, whatever it is, no opinions, no judgment. You probably get a little bit angry if somebody started to demean those. Well, that's what happened. And as a result, there was a whole kind of hacktivist set of activity. Hacktivism really it refers to a casual treatment or attack of a set of resources, really mostly for cosmetic purposes to start. They'll go after a web page, they'll deface the web page, they might bring it down for a little while, nothing to really rattle the cages too hard. But what happens is these hacktivist channels, they get backing from social media, from musicians, from society. They grow in power, they grow in money, and now all of a sudden, this kind of I want to kind of get my message hacktivist across hacktivist type thing turns into a major production. In which case, now you start seeing attacks from all over the world. You see much more complicated botnets. You see things like this. So in Australia, you see, to Brian Green's point before, you see now a group of not just healthcare, but many cross vertical targets for something that was arguably somebody maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time, not even intentionally done. Now, whether it was intentional or unintentional, that's, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder there. But, there are attacks like this that are coming. This is why preparation and having something, as that safety net is such a big deal, because you kind of never know where it's going to come from.
Right. And when you're talking across different industries too, right? The effect can be very different from one industry type or one customer type to another, right? In terms of things like healthcare, you're talking about maybe not being able to schedule or, look up resources or something, which could affect human life. When you're talking about industry, you're talking, manufacturing, there could be revenue issues there and whatnot. At the end of the day, it's going to cost something, right? Whether that's
and that cost. So Brian will tell you there were Brian lives in the Northeast, and there are healthcare organizations across the Northeast that Brian and I, again, we'll leave the names out to protect the innocent, but that we've been in for all different sorts of kinds of conversations that they have. Remember, there are HIPAA regulatory authority type things you have to deal with from an availability perspective. There is data protection rules in that respect. And then you look at things like, yes, you mentioned scheduling, you mentioned operation of a hospital and communications with doctors securely. There are pharmacy systems, there's patient medical record systems. All these different things come together as one kind of operational umbrella for a hospital. I will tell you, my son, the genius that he is, who's graduating from Penn State in 4 days.
Nice.
I'm really proud of him. Say,
Congrats,
listen,
that's awesome.
he is a smart kid. He takes care of his mom. Good thing for him. But he was, as college kids do, 6'4", 280 pounds, playing basketball in Crocs and broke his ankle in 2 places. Nice.
Oh, no.
Genius. Really, really smart kid. So we were at Mount Nittany Hospital in Penn State, which I will call that out because they were fantastic. But it just made me think when I was sitting there. They have robotic surgery, Brian. They have things that are let's just use the bad English word, takeoverable. And if that were to happen, could be catastrophic in outcome.
Yeah.
And some of the outcomes are financial, Brian. I mean, we've bumped into those certainly enough. But there are threats to operation. There are threats to all of these aspects require us to be multimodal in our ability to deal with these attacks. So I think you've characterized it right. There's a business side, there's a technical side, there's a regulatory side, and then there's often a nation state side. You look at what's going on in Ukraine. Brian, you mentioned it exactly right before. The attacks there are crazy in terms of density and numbers and all of this, and they go across networks to applications to many different modes of attack, and to deal with those really requires some advanced technology to handle, and it's been quite a what now couple of years protecting
Yeah.
those guys.
It's interesting. You think of DDoS, right? And I know you mentioned, defacing a company's website, or, not allowing, those public services to be available, which could be something as seemingly simple as not being able to schedule, which, as we've just discussed, can definitely have lasting impacts. But as you were talking, I was thinking, I'm like, when services become unavailable and business needs to continue to run, well, regardless of what the industry is, human nature is going to be to do something out of band, right? Whether that's bringing out the old ordering sheets and doing it by hand, or using different methods of communication that don't fall under that regulatory compliance, right? But it also allows that of course has implications of further detriment to the organization, right? Where you could have data loss
Right.
in the event that someone is, I can't access the email to upload the file, so I'm just going to upload it to Dropbox here, right? Because Dropbox is up and my website's down, right? Those kind of things, they're the ripples that are caused by events like this, where you bring down a service or a website or whatever that is.
Yeah, and Brian, it's behavior by desperation there in that respect, right? So at that point in time, you're in deep. So one of the things that I've seen Brian Green do time after time after time is to help his customers get out of water with kind of an emergency onboarding service, which really helps because it allows them, with many of these organizations, even the big healthcare organizations or universities perhaps, or other government agencies, handling attacks of this mode and this size and scale, it's context to them. It's not core. So you really do need to help, but you bring up something that really actually caused me to think of something different too. One of the things that often becomes a problem when these attacks go on is people act out of desperation because there are commitments you have to make, there's SLAs you have to make, there are businesses you have to run. So now all of a sudden, to your point, whereas I might have had a rule that said in this specific business, we're only going to allow you to use, I'll use your example, Dropbox. So you can't use Box, you can't use any of the other online file storage. We call that shadow IT as a term. So what do you do? How do you? So the first step to getting all this right is to have a plan. Many Brian, don't even start with a plan. Right? They deal with when their hair is on fire, and at that point it's too late. Mm-hmm. So if you go and start to formulate a plan and you say, all right, I have these critical assets that need to be identified. I do that. Now I need to figure out how to protect them. Is it data exfiltration that's my biggest problem? Is it availability of the network? And for availability, where might I have that run? Many folks will go and take as the deployment of routers for Cisco has matured over the years, we put them in, let's just argue, better places in the network sometimes. Well, in order to cater to ultra low latency response times for services like connected gaming, virtual reality, IoT, things like this, you need to actually take portions of the network and push it way out toward that edge, whatever the edge is. In carriers, we call it the MEC edge. In enterprises, we just call it the WAN edge, whatever it is. But there's a proximity that's required to those services. And that requires us to not only be smart about the security technology we're deploying. Do I put it on-prem? Do I put it in the cloud? Do I need to look at what network level stuff, layer 3, layer 4? Do I need to look at application layer stuff? Is it encrypted? There are lots of questions tiered in that way that we need to deal with. When we did the OEM from Radware to Cisco in this respect, about now what, Brian, 9 years ago, 8 9 years ago, um, this is why we did it, because the ability to apply that multimodal protection and mitigation service. I'm telling you, Brian, if you're getting attacked and the attackers are at the front door of your home, it's too late. Yep. Right? You want those guys kept way the heck away from the front door of your house. That's why we have services in the cloud that act as a safety blanket to go and help with what happens to be in your home. Now, if a criminal wants to come and make his way into your home, now all of a sudden he's got to beat the army first, and then get to your home, and then beat the army again. And the mindset, Brian Green, that we found is that cyber criminals will try to take the most profitable, easy route to get there. Mm-hmm. Right. So, Brian Young, that's something to think about too, is not only the technology stack, not only where it's vulnerable, but how do I make it sustainable? Because you kind of don't want to protect just for these 5 minutes. You want to have a safety net under your business, and actually you may be required. If you look at the new laws in Britain in terms of cybersecurity, they actually may need to prove that they have that safety net in place. Otherwise, there's a percentage of revenue. I think it's 10% now for a year penalty. It's crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why this partnership works so well, is the fact that Cisco's built a business on building, tier one, detection tools, right? And I think now through this partnership with Radware, you guys have a mitigation tool as well, best in breed, to deliver, the number one security end-to-end solution that Cisco strives for day in and day out, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important too when you're figuring out your plans, right? You need to kind of look at both sides of that coin in terms of who is going to possibly be attacking you, right? You could have the script kiddie that's, just playing around and maybe looking to make a few Bitcoin, but you could have a nation state behind you, and in that point, that's why we call them advanced persistent threats, because they are persistent, and it can be a multi-layered, multifaceted approach, like I was talking about before, where the initial attack maybe is a DDoS to shake them up and to get them to undo things to try to get things working again, right? As you said, if they're at your door, right, you're scrambling. You're going to knock over the lamp trying to get over to move the table to put it in front of the door. You're going to make mistakes if you don't have a set plan that everyone follows rigorously.
So
Brian,
you can take
that final attack, and then, you can go through that initial attack, open up those doors, and then put something else in there and continue and exfiltrate data, etc.
Yeah, indeed. And APTs or advanced persistent threats are actually a very interesting thing, because the nature of an advanced persistent threat is a threat that actually comes, to use the analogy of your home again. It's and believe me, I got nobody outside your house, I promise. But you shouldn't be.
I'm not worried.
You shouldn't be. Yep. And but to think about it, APTs are a very interesting part of the conversation, because the nature of what happens, the reason why they're called advanced persistent threats, is that you actually have some malware that infiltrates into your network and sits there dormant for a period of time. Sometimes, in some of the well-known breaches in the U.S., a half a year to 3/4 of a year. And then they're activated via command and control channel to go and now do its thing. So you kind of the the objective here, Brian, is I write it so that you let your guard down. And you might have notice of some infiltration, and everybody looks around. And they say, "Well, okay, not much is going on here." So this is a very sneaky way to to be there. Maybe I'm going to scan and see what data is coming across and wait for a little while to try to exfiltrate it. I mean, I think if I were to show you the some of the data from the Ukraine. One of the things you'll find that Brian Green and I were both really surprised about was we saw 158,000 data exfiltration attempts, I think, in a day. In a day, right? So if you think about what we're doing here, people ask me what we do. I like to say that we protect the critical applications and the networks that deliver them. And when you look at it, that's what DDoS really is. It, as Brian Green said it right, it doesn't discriminate on who you are, and often it doesn't discriminate on where you are. So we're having to. There's a security best practice, Brian Young, to mitigate a threat as close to the source as possible to minimize the collateral damage. Well, in order to do that, we have deployed cloud DDoS pops all over the world so that we can actually exercise on that. So think now, Brian, that you pick your favorite business that's international in nature, that's got offices all over the world. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to actually apply this safety net and deal in an agile way to be able to mitigate these attacks and see them literally as close to so maybe it's a nation state in question and I want to geo block. Maybe it's whatever it happens to be that we want to block very close to the source. And, this might sound a little bit, down in the weeds-ish, but it becomes a very important thing because it makes availability and sustainability a very realizable thing. I mean, if you've just got an appliance sitting on protecting your front door, it very well may be too late. So you got to be able to be prepared to deal with it in that respect.
Well, what's interesting too, you talk about, I think we make a big deal, and we should, about these nation states, these hacktivist firms that are wreaking havoc on the world. If you look at state and local government, about a year ago, they were on the hit list for KillNet, right? So K through 12, higher ed. So the way I like to look at it is even the threats have changed, right? And those that are implementing those threats. So we saw a lot of issues with K through 12 over a certain period. And then when we did some analysis on those attacks, we found that we're finding the access to these DDoS attacks software on the dark web is pretty easy. So we're finding, in what I would like to call the next gen, or the new age pulling of the fire alarm. We're seeing kids go into the dark web, download a piece of software, distribute it to their school system, take it down so that they don't have to take a test. So the attacks come in many forms and fashion. We make again, the headlines will read, attack firms out of whatever nation state, but in reality, we're dealing with some of these threats from within at a young age, right?
No, Brian, you're absolutely right, and it's not only it's not only going to the dark web to easily get access to attack tools, but it's also in the kind of thing where they can go and on the dark web and post evidence that they can exfiltrate, transcripts or student records or whatever, that could, just to rattle their cages a little, right? And you may never see that out in the public domain, but you'll see it there just to this is how ransomware works. So basically, there'll be a little shot over the bow, and a little bit of an attack. Maybe I'll throw attacks, Brian Young, come in really two flavors from a DDoS perspective. There's a volumetric flavor, which means that I basically, if you in an interview format like this, a volumetric attack would be that I just keep talking the entire time so you can't get a word in edgewise. That's exactly what it is. So you're going to run out of capacity in a technology stack it would be memory, disk, whatever, the capability to respond to whatever service I normally do. And that has its set of effects, even some reflective effects. Think about this. These guys, if I were to go in and launch an attack on, you pick your favorite bank. We'll keep the names out. And that app is not available, and I go and check it, and the bank is down. Now what's going to happen? They're going to have now a million people are going to call the IVR system for the bank, and it's going to melt.
Yep.
So now all of a sudden you have this huge customer resource and service issue and churn issue, because what happens next? People say, well, if this bank can't safely take care of my money, I'm going elsewhere. I have choices.
Yep. Go
right?
pull out all my money, and then the ATM.
Yeah, well, and it gets even better. So, there's this volumetric, often in the game that Brian Green and I play, we call it a volumetric distraction. Because I basically throw a ton of traffic, sometimes well organized, sometimes junk, at some poor resource to make it so busy that it can't respond to what it's supposed to be doing. But then those are usually followed, Brian, by what we call a low and slow attack, a more directed, application-oriented attack. And these can be equally or more as destructive, usually resulting in data exfiltration or compromising of an application, or even the ability to leverage most companies' inability to detect the difference between good bots and bad bots. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that much of the traffic in the internet today runs via bots. In other words, coordinated, robot-oriented, acting,
API calls,
units of PCs or servers or entities. Okay, well, it is often very, very difficult with standard controls, firewalls, IPSs, things like this, to tell the difference between a good bot or a bad bot, because the traffic, even when it's malicious in intent. So in other words, I might go and log in, have a number of attempted logins into that bank app on your phone, or I might have a number of attempts. Let's say Brian Green sells TVs and online, and I'm going to now have a bot go and purchase in a fake way every minute a TV, so his inventory is down to zero. So when Tom goes to buy a TV from Brian, he comes around and says, well, shoot, Brian's site, I like him, but his site has zero left, so I'm going to go buy it from Brian Young instead. Maybe that'll make you fund TVs. Maybe it'll allow you to fund the replacement of your green car. But anyway, but joking aside, there are different tiers and layers to denial of service attacks in this respect. So there is a technology stack that Cisco bring as part of the Cisco Secure DDoS service now to both detect these and mitigate them. And this is kind of the game that we play. Like Brian Green said, you have some attackers that are using elementary level stuff you can almost download. For those of you old enough to remember, almost like Visual Basic style, where you can literally bring up a GUI and write your own attack code in no time. Right, and get it deployed. I mean, if you happen to know how to use Metasploit or any of these kinds of tools, you could write your own malware 10 minutes. That doesn't take long if you know what you're doing. So you do in fact need to be able to understand the nuances and the layers that come with dealing with these DDoS attacks. And Brian and I talk to these hospitals, the government agencies, the universities, the businesses, whomever they are, or the carriers themselves. These are the conversations we're having. It's not do you protect against DDoS, because it's not a new game. Brian Green, I think this is one of the things that people are a little misinformed about. People have been protecting against denial of service for 30, 40 years now.
As long as they had a network pipe, right? I mean, if you think about it, as long as they were receiving traffic from the internet.
You Brian, you talked about you cut your teeth in the data center in terms of background, which is a great background to have in this respect, because if you look at what we've done over the years, very long time ago, we would use techniques like remote trigger black hole filtering. What that means in English is that I take the entire suspected flow of traffic and I send it to a bit bucket in the router. I throw it all away. Now, so Brian Young, that sounds great, right? It's easy. I just route it off and, oh, yeah, but the attackers are kind of smarter than that these days. So now I'm going to mix in some good traffic with the bad traffic. So now can you afford to just throw it all away? If you do, you're helping the criminal DOS your own network.
Yep.
So you need to have an ability to be smarter about how you do this. And there's been an evolution of DDoS technology over the years, application security technology. Brian Young, you mentioned API before. So there's this network side DDoS, there's this application side DDoS, there's this encryption issue to deal with. What can you see and how do you see if it's encrypted? And then finally, there's this whole AppSec angle that snaps application security, that snaps right in. How do I deal with OAuth's top 10 oriented WAF type things with dynamic policy? You think about it, Brian, from now to 10 minutes from now, the behavioral profile of my critical applications may change substantially. So I have to be dynamic and deal with that. We do that. You have data exfiltration attempts and misuse attempts against APIs. I don't think there's an application set on this planet today that doesn't use some sort of software-to-software communications through API, right? So you need to be able to do that. And then you have the bot detection stuff that I was talking about before, the ability to use machine learning to discern the difference between good bots and bad bots. And that's also a major part. And when you kind of put all those together, then this is kind of the recipe that the chef has cooked up for dealing with these kinds of attacks today.
It's interesting, Mike, because if you look at some of our larger customers that we have under protection in some of their attack history, right? You look at it. It starts initially with denial of service, right? They'll try and they'll they won't gain a whole lot of traction, so they'll shift their tactics a bit and start focusing more on the application layer, right? So we'll see more AppSec type launch attacks and botware type attacks and things of that nature. Awesome, we have you covered in that regard as well. So they're getting creative. When they can't find a kind of a kink in the armor, they'll shift gears a bit. So make no mistake, we can we got you covered.
Nice.
When kind of looking back earlier in the conversation about having a plan, right, is kind of the most important thing. The way I kind of look at it too is, I mean, let's say in like the last 10 years, the push to cloud, right? The cloud first mentality for all customers. And there's probably customers out there who 10 years ago thought, I don't really, my website goes down, not a big deal, right? Most of my traffic is internal. And, if someone tried to attack us, it wouldn't be the end of the world. We can deal with it. Nowadays, I mean, you've got so many resources that you rely on in the cloud, right? Calling. Everyone's moving their calling infrastructure out to the cloud. They're, to your point, like hospitals with their IVR and their contact centers, right? All that's based in the cloud. You get attacked and you're saturating your pipe, right? You don't know how to clear that. You're losing everything now. So even, Salesforce,
if the provider that
Box,
you're using gets attacked, right? Because that's the other piece of it too. If I go after, let's say, Salesforce.com, all of their customers are affected.
right?
Big time, right?
Yeah,
I didn't mean
but
to interrupt you.
Brian, well-prepared customers in that respect. I'll keep the name out, but you mentioned one. But they take the step to make sure that they have that safety blanket provided off-prem. Right now, they have a lot of stuff they do on-prem too. And I'm not talking about just that one, but in general, um, and it is a defense in depth. The question, Tom, that you ask reminds me of a book I read in graduate school called "Who Moved My Cheese?" And there's a concept here that says, well, the focus was on the enterprise link to the WAN, because that was the link to the internet. Now, Brian Young, to your point, it might be the link that goes from your private data center into the cloud, and how are you protecting it and the critical applications. So we're working with a lot of the cloud providers as well, to have to take advantage of the services we have to complement their availability. So as you may know, most of these cloud providers, at their size and scale, have the opportunity to do things that many enterprises can't do by themselves. But that being said, they're taking our technology, the application protection technology, the network protection technology, and we're offering at it for protection for ingress and egress to different VPCs, for example, or different different equivalents on Azure or GCP, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I would fully agree. And not only that, you have for example, if you pick on Amazon for a minute in a positive way, if you run a Kubernetes driven application on top of EKS, and you might have some Lambda functions that sit in front of this. Lambda functions are serverless code. So what exactly are you attacking? Now to steal the phrase, now the cheese has moved yet again, because now we need to look at, do we have denial of service opportunities opened up by what's being run in the code? Are there memory overflow? Are there buffer overflow problems in that respect? So Cisco's asset of App Dynamics helps a lot in things like this. But you think about what defense in depth means in terms of, I've tried to keep product names out of it, but let's look at Cisco's point of view on this. You have from the internet in, you have the DDoS capability and the AppSec capability. That's the result of our partnership with Cisco. That is delivered in a hybrid mode, partly in the cloud to complement what is on-prem. Okay, cool. Now, you have critical assets that make your network tick. Okay, your routing control plane. That is beautifully managed and controlled by Thousand Eyes. Okay, now you look at it and say, well, I have BGP oriented stuff that I need to deal with, because as we saw in some of the recent attacks, you can have what they call a route starvation attack. In other words, I can use a miscrafted time to live entry in a BGP packet to make it go in and peel the route away. In other words, now all of a sudden the network is unreachable. All right, so I need to be able to deal with that. Well, we do that across not only Thousand Eyes, but with what used to be BGPmon that came with OpenDNS. Now that's part of Cisco Crossworks. So you look at the different components. Tom, your question about the plan, it still remains core to the whole thing, which is, I as a CISO, I have to sit back and I'm responsible for talking about what the critical assets are. How do I lock them down? What the critical vulnerabilities are, and how do I patch them and deal with them on a regular operational basis? That red teaming, blue teaming, that kind of thing to make that happen. So it is a bit of a multimodal game that we play here, and I think both Tom and Brian, I think you guys have that part of it right. It's not just a simple. We turn around and we say, well, I'm going to fix the DDoS problem. Okay.
Yeah. Right. No, too many different methods of attack. And then, of course, if your assets are spread around, and Tom, I'm glad you mentioned the cloud thing, because I was thinking the exact same thing. Do your assets have to be on-prem versus in the cloud versus hybrid, right? But the other thing, too, and I think this has kind of been an underlying theme of this entire discussion, is that the barrier of entry is lower. And my brother and I were just having a conversation yesterday. We were driving around, and we were talking about things like artificial intelligence. And the thing I mentioned to him is I said artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's not new. It's been around for a while, right? It's becoming a big thing because its barrier of entry has dropped significantly. Anytime a company or organization or group brings down the barrier of entry, it causes another evolution. Look at the smartphone. Apple didn't invent the smartphone with the iPhone. I had smartphones from HP and Motorola before Apple came out with the iPhone. We were using Windows Mobile. I think it was Mobile 2003, right? It was there. The Palm Pilot, they were a big thing. Apple didn't invent those things. It just brought the barrier of entry really low. Sometimes it can be cost. A lot of times it can be ease of use. And the thing with what's going on now with artificial intelligence and the reason why everyone's freaking out about it, and in our last episode we just talked about it significantly, is because of things like ChatGPT being in the news all the time and available. And it's like, hey, I can take this pie in the sky technology and bring it down to a level that you or I can work with it, where we can use it for free or pay $20 a month, right? Again, barrier of entry lower. And I say all that to preface with this stuff with DDoS, right? When you're talking about DDoS as a service, where you can go on the dark web and pay probably $20, $50, $100, whatever, to have a botnet farm attack whatever you want, right? And again, it could just be, as you mentioned, the example of the kid wanting to skip the test that day, just bring down the school's website, right? I remember when it was just people, they would just pull the fire alarm to get out of school. Now they attack the website. But whether it's something as I would say lower impact, right, as that, all the way up to healthcare, nation state, etc., the tools are more available. They're more accessible. The barrier of entry is lower, and for that reason, we need to make sure that the CISOs and the people responsible within organizations have that plan, have understood the risks, and have figured out ways to reduce and where to accept those risks.
Well, Bryan, think about it this way. This is why there's such a demand for for good people in cybersecurity these days. I'll give you an example. My wife is a high school math teacher, and we were kind of commiserating about ChatGPT the other day. It's really interesting. So I showed her what I thought was cool, in that ChatGPT was used to craft malware. It literally wrote the malware for an attacker. And it's pretty good, not bad. A little bit of holes in it here and there, but pretty damn good, right? To Brian Green's point about getting started as a high school kid or whatever. But you know what? Also, you got to be. What's interesting is, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. The same way, she turned around and said, "Okay, I got that. Go on ChatGPT and ask it to do simple math." I said, "Okay."
Interesting angle.
I said, "Okay." So we did, and she gave an example of subtracting one number from another number, and it was wrong. Simple math, like 17 minus 11 kind of thing. I don't remember exactly what she told me to do, but there was a bug. It didn't calculate it correctly. So there's this constant challenge of, even on the attacker side, of having confidence that it's going to work. That when people go in and attack things from a DDoS perspective, it is very largely about reputation and fame and things like this. It's not always about money. It's not always about ransom.
Right.
So, when these tools, as cool as ChatGPT is, and to go back to my son, he said, he's graduating, and he said, so he went to ChatGPT and asked it to write his thesis for him. He gave it the topic, just for giggles. I mean, it was all done. Because most universities, funny as you may surmise, consider that cheating.
Yeah.
Right. So he's like, all right, Dad, let's just give it a try. So he did, and it wrote. I'm not grading his thesis. I'm not a subject matter expert in his major, but I got to tell you, man, it was pretty darn good. It wrote him probably what amounted to about 200 pages worth of an essay on pulling out quotes from famous people, whether you agree with those famous people or not. But it's all about how it's trained. So there's the goods and the bads to it. I think there's a technology cycle, especially with AI, that to your point about we've been using it for a long time. The bot detection capability I talked about, because you can't just use a firewall to block it, has to have some AI or machine learning associated to it. The web application capability has some AI and machine learning associated to it. The DDoS capability has what we call behavioral DOS. What that means in English is we look at it even for a day zero thing, the difference between day zero and day one. Day one is stuff I know about. Brian, you might sit there and say, well, anybody with a blue and white checkered shirt like you're wearing, they can't come into this podcast today. Okay, fine. Check. There goes Mike. We're done. But there are things that might happen that come around that I've never seen before. We call those day zero attacks. So in order to have a laser-like focus and bring the customer to a healthy state as quick as humanly possible, there's a learning capability that happens there that we call behavioral DOS. It's all examples of things that we can do better because of the application of AI or machine learning to this space. It's a really interesting point you make, Brian, because it's an integral part of what we do, and it has been for some time. But you're right, AI is starting to it's bringing economies of scale, especially to attackers with some, again, pretty darn good malware. It's a matter of AI gets better when people who are who have some smarts will go and train it. And you see people putting the time in to train it because the outcomes are really good.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. It's funny, you were talking before about, knocking in my door, and all I keep hearing is someone trying to knock into your door.
Well, to be technically correct, it would be to knock on my roof. Yes, but yes, that is happening.
Mike, you're the best guest and the worst guest all at the same time, because you're best in the fact that you come in with a load of information, but worst in the fact that you've got the smoke detector going off and you got people working on your roof. But that's all right.
Yes.
We pushed through. We didn't want to reschedule this again, so no, this has been great.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that, Brian. It's a circus. It's literally fine. A circus here today. All I'm waiting for is the little guy and the elephant and the trapeze artist. That's all that's missing in my house today.
We'll see what we can edit out in post, but you know what? Okay. At the end of the day,
Cool.
It's real world. Leave it, let it be. Tom, any other final questions before we start to wrap this one up?
No, I think I'm all set. I think that was a great little session there. I think,
yeah.
Like I said, I think the really important thing is to have a plan. That was the thing I definitely took out of it. I mean,
yeah.
Especially, and to your point, Brian, the lowering the barrier of entry, 100%. That's kind of what I was getting at, right? Was I don't think you have to be a government entity or a major bank to be concerned about this anymore. I think it trickles down, to companies with employees, in the 50 range. I think this is something where everyone really should be concerned about.
I know this is a little off topic, but I think it's pretty close to being on topic, because I think it came down from a DDoS attack. But I have said this to so many people. I told this story so many times. I used to tell customers that we were talking about Cisco's time to detection and how our time to detection was 18 and a half days or something like that, or 18 and a half hours, whereas the industry standard was like 200 days and whatnot. And I used to say the likelihood of you being hit by a 0-day is pretty low. But in the event that it does happen, you can rest assured that it would happen, be detected quickly. And then WannaCry happened. And I don't say that anymore, right? Like, and again, it's all about that lower barrier to entry. This is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. There's going to be new methods of attack. There's going to be new things that people want to try and do, whether it's just for the lulz or, for hacktivism or for nation state or exfiltration of state secrets or company secrets or money, whatever it is, right? There's always a reason behind it. And you're getting attacked from all angles for all different reasons. So
yeah, and Bryan, I'm with you. I'll drop this thought in your head. So from that perspective, and if you look at it, the time to detection, we're talking about in the space to make sure that you don't have session timeouts and things. We're talking about 10 to 18 seconds that we're making this. I appreciate also the fact though that the Cisco annual attack cyber report that comes out did call out that stat that you very correctly said. But remember, the depth. This is across the depth and breadth of an entire enterprise, right? So, but the technology today is really pushing that envelope, and the partnership that we've had with Cisco and the Cisco offers in the DDoS and AppSec space, as a result, have really kind of changed the narrative there. You're right to call it out, but for us, if it takes 200 hours to figure out that you're being attacked. I mean, we see these attacks in spiky form that will come as a burst and put terabits of attack traffic thrown, and it comes and goes in 17 seconds or something like this.
Well, regardless of the market vertical or business sector, right? I mean,
yep.
Business works at an incredible speed at this day and age. So I mean, minutes and hours, or you can't count minutes and hours anymore. The amount of cost and revenue and lives that could be lost during that short period is astonishing, right?
Yeah, well said.
Staggering.
Well, I guess I'll leave you with one thing. If I can convey one message, is the fact that listen. I think Mike Tyson said it best. It's important to have a plan. Make no mistake about it. But everyone has a plan until they get hit in the face, right? So whether you're a Cisco employee or Cisco sales rep, or you're a customer out there that is exploring denial of service, just know that if you do come under attack, we have our emergency onboarding solution that you guys can take advantage of. I encourage you to reach out to your Cisco team, and we'll be ready and waiting to help you guys navigate a tremendous, kind of an interesting time, right?
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, both from the prevention standpoint and also from the reactive. Obviously, you want to plan, but if you are stuck between a rock and a hard place and you need help, that's still something that we can help with. So, as I always say, right. If you have any questions about this stuff, if you want to learn more, if you want to maybe test the waters and kind of see like, hey, what would DDoS protection for my organization look like for me? Reach out to your Cisco account reps. Let's get the conversation started. Maybe if you're in the Northeast, you can be blessed with Michael and or Bryan's presence and hit them up for questions. Obviously, Michael knows what he's talking about. I think we were all kind of giving Tom a volumetric attack of our own, not letting him get a word in edgewise, or Bryan. But that's okay. That's all right. That's what this is all about.
Listen, I know my lane, right? I surround myself with really smart people.
No, it's funny because I remember Bryan. I was like, Bryan, you want to do the show? And he's like, yeah, I want to get Mike in. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And I'm like, I know why you got Mike in. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
he's the brains behind the operation.
Listen, man, great teams, great things. We have we're blessed with a lot of very talented people on our team, and listen, it only benefits the people listening to this podcast. And if you need the help, ask for it.
Yep,
we're happy to help.
100%. Well, thank you all for joining us on this episode covering DDoS. And, of course, thank you for listening to Conf T with ERC. And if you haven't already figured it out, we do have a YouTube channel. All right. If you're on the YouTube channel, you'll see this little YouTube stats thing that keeps kind of going behind me. As of right now, and I'm hoping this will be growing by the time this gets published, we're at 68 subs and 999 views. We're one away from 1,000. We were hoping it would kind of flip over during the show, but that's okay. It didn't happen. But you can make that difference by going ahead and smashing that subscribe button on YouTube. Bring that sub count up. And, of course, obviously, near and dear to my heart, the original format of the show, the podcast, please continue sharing it out. I've been amazed at just how much the show has reached out and branched out to so many countries and listeners. So, again, thank you very much for doing that. And please continue to do so if you find the information helpful to you. And with that, again, thank you for joining us today. And as always, stay safe out there. And don't forget to save that config.